It was a sunny Saturday afternoon when Mia and her friends decided to go to the park. The bright sun shone down on them, making the day feel warm and cheerful. Mia, a 12-year-old girl, loved spending time with her friends. She had a cheerful spirit and always found joy in the little things, like the laughter of her friends and the playful bark of dogs nearby. Mia had a disability that made it hard for her to walk, so she used a wheelchair. Despite this, she never let her condition stop her from having fun. She loved to play games, and her friends were always there to help. They would race their wheelchairs on the smooth paths of the park and cheer each other on. On this day, they were playing tag. Maya felt free and happy, her laughter ringing through the air. But then, everything changed. As Mia rolled along the path, she noticed a police officer watching them. The officer had a stern look on his face. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't understand why he was staring at them. She continued to laugh and play, hoping he would just walk by. But the officer approached them, and the atmosphere suddenly felt heavy. "Hey, what's going on here?" the officer shouted, his voice loud and sharp. Mia and her friends stopped playing and looked at him, confusion written on their faces. "We're just having fun," one of Mia's friends said, trying to explain. But the officer did not seem to care. He pointed at Mia and said, "You need to stop this right now. It looks suspicious." Mia's heart raced. She had never been in trouble before. She felt a mix of fear and confusion. "What do you mean?" "We're just playing," she said softly, her voice trembling. The officer ignored her. "You're causing a disturbance. I'm going to have to take action," he barked. The way he spoke made Maya feel small and helpless. Mia's friends tried to defend her. "She's just a kid. She didn't do anything wrong," they shouted, but their voices only seemed to make the officer angrier. Without warning, the officer stepped forward and grabbed Mia's wheelchair. "You need to leave," he ordered, pulling her away from her friends. Mia's heart sank. "Please, let me go back to my friends," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. But the officer didn't listen. He pushed her wheelchair harshly, making Mia's body jolt with the sudden movement. "You are breaking the law, and I will not have this in my town," he yelled. The situation escalated quickly. Maya's friends were screaming now, begging the officer to stop. "Leave her alone. She's just a girl," one of them shouted, but the officer was too caught up in his anger to listen. Suddenly, he lost control. In a moment of frustration, he pushed Mia's wheelchair hard, causing it to tip over. Maya fell to the ground, landing awkwardly. Pain shot through her body, and she cried out, not just from the physical hurt, but from the shock of it all. "Mia," her friend screamed, rushing to her side. They helped her sit up, but Mia was scared and shaken. The officer stood over her, looking down with a mix of anger and confusion. "What did I tell you? You can't be here," he barked, but now his voice was quieter, almost unsure. Mia's heart raced, and she felt a wave of fear wash over her. She looked at her friends, who were kneeling beside her, their faces filled with worry. They whispered comforting words, trying to calm her down. But all she could focus on was the officer standing above her, his shadow looming large and threatening. "Mia, are you okay?" one friend asked, reaching for her hand. I think so," Maya replied, her voice barely a whisper. At that moment, her mother arrived. She had been at a nearby store and felt something was wrong when she saw the commotion in the park. When she rushed over, her heart sank at the sight of her daughter on the ground. "Mia," she cried, running to her side. She knelt beside Mia, wrapping her arms around her tightly. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Mia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "The officer, he pushed me," she stammered, pointing at the man who had caused her so much pain. The officer, realizing he had gone too far, looked at Mia's mother with a mix of regret and fear. I was just trying to keep the peace," he stammered, trying to defend himself. But Mia's mother was furious. "You don't treat a child like this. She was just playing. You have no right to hurt her." Mia felt the warmth of her mother's embrace, and for a moment she felt safe again. But the fear lingered, and she knew this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. As the park became filled with curious onlookers, Maya's heart was heavy with confusion and fear. She realized that her world had changed in an instant. The sunny day had turned dark, and she would never look at the park the same way again. Mia's mother held her tightly, whispering calming words. "You're safe now, honey. I'm here," she said, but Mia could feel the tension in her mother's body. Maya's friends gathered around, their faces pale and worried. They all watched as the officer stepped back, his demeanor shifting from anger to unease. The crowd that had formed began to murmur. Some people were shocked by what had happened, while others seemed unsure about whether to support the officer or Mia. In that moment, Mia felt very small and exposed, as if the whole world was watching her and judging. "Mia, can you stand?" her mother asked gently, looking into her daughter's eyes. Mia nodded, though it was a struggle. With the help of her friends, she slowly maneuvered back into her wheelchair, trying to regain some sense of control. "I'm okay," she lied, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She hated how vulnerable she felt, how helpless the officer had made her. "Mia, you don't have to pretend," one of her friends said softly. "It's okay to be upset." As they wheeled her away from the scene, the officer stood quietly, watching them leave. The once stern look on his face had faded, replaced with an expression that was difficult to read. Mia couldn't help but feel a flicker of confusion. Did he feel regret? Did he realize how wrong he had been? As they reached a quieter area of the park, Mia's mom pulled out her phone and called her husband. "You won't believe what just happened," she said, her voice shaking with anger and worry. "Mia was pushed over by a police officer. I'm taking her to the hospital to get checked out." Mia listened, her heart racing. "Mom, I'm fine." "Really?" she insisted, but her mother didn't seem convinced. After a few minutes, Mia's dad arrived. He rushed to them, concern etched across his face. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling next to Mia and examining her for any injuries. Maya felt the warmth of her father's love surrounding her, but her heart was heavy. "It was the officer. He was mean, and he pushed my chair," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father's face hardened. "That's unacceptable. No one should treat you like that, especially someone who is supposed to protect us." His words were firm, and Maya felt a sense of comfort in them. As they made their way to the hospital, Mia's mom held her hand tightly. "You are brave, Mia. Remember that," she said. Mia nodded, grateful for her mother's support, but her heart was still filled with confusion and hurt. At the hospital, the doctors checked Mia for any injuries. Thankfully, she only had some bruises and scrapes. But they did more than examine her body. They also listened to her story. Mia told them about the officer and how he had pushed her. The doctors exchanged worried glances, and Mia could see their concern. "We'll make sure you're okay," one of the nurses said kindly. "You're safe here." Once Mia was cleared, they headed home. The ride was quiet, each family member lost in their thoughts. When they finally arrived, Maya felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. "Mia, we're going to do something about this," her dad said firmly as they stepped inside. "We can't let this go. No one should be treated like that, especially you." Mia looked at her dad, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Do we have to?" "It was just one officer," she said, unsure if she wanted to relive the painful incident. "Yes, we do," her mother said, kneeling down to look her in the eyes. "We need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. You are strong, and your voice matters." Mia felt a mix of fear and determination. She didn't want to go through the pain of it all again, but she also knew her parents were right. She needed to stand up for herself and others who might face the same situation. That night, as Mia lay in bed, She replayed the day in her mind. The laughter with her friends, the sudden confrontation, the feeling of fear, and the warmth of her family's love. Each moment played like a movie, and she felt a fire starting to burn within her. She wanted to be brave, to face the challenges ahead, and to make a difference. As she closed her eyes, Mia made a promise to herself. She would not let fear silence her. She would find her voice and use it to bring attention to what had happened. With that thought in her mind, she drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through Mia's bedroom window, warming her face. But despite the light, a dark cloud of anxiety loomed over her. Mia was still processing the events of the previous day. The image of the officer's angry face was stuck in her mind, and she felt a mix of fear and determination. Mia's parents had already made plans to report the incident. They wanted to ensure that Mia's story was heard. After breakfast, her dad sat down with Mia at the kitchen table, looking serious. "Mia, today we're going to talk to some people who can help," he said. "I need you to tell them everything that happened. Your voice is very important." Mia nodded, but her heart raced. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "They will believe you," her dad reassured her. "You are brave, and what happened to you is not right. We have to make sure that officer is held accountable." Mia felt comforted by her dad's words, but she was still scared. What if telling her story made things worse? What if the officer was angry at her? After some time, they drove to the local police department. The building looked imposing, with tall walls and dark windows. Mia felt a wave of fear wash over her as they entered. Would they treat her the same way the officer had? Inside, they were greeted by a kind receptionist, who immediately sensed Mia's nervousness. "Hi there, what brings you here today?" she asked with a warm smile. Mia's dad stepped forward. "We need to file a complaint about an incident involving my daughter," he explained. "She was assaulted by a police officer yesterday." The receptionist's expression changed to one of concern. "I'm very sorry to hear that. Please have a seat, and I'll call someone who can help you." Mia sat down, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. They waited for what felt like an eternity. Finally, a woman in a police uniform approached them. She introduced herself as Officer Taylor. "Hi, Mia. I'm here to listen to your story," she said gently. "Take your time and tell me everything you can remember." Mia took a deep breath. She could feel her dad's reassuring hand on her shoulder, and she knew she had to be brave. "I was at the park with my friends when a police officer came up to me," she began, recounting the day's events as clearly as she could. As Mia spoke, Officer Taylor listened intently, nodding and taking notes. "That sounds very upsetting, Mia. You did nothing wrong, and it's important that we understand what happened," she said after Mia finished. The officer asked her several questions about the incident, trying to get as much detail as possible. Mia felt a sense of empowerment as she spoke. Sharing her story felt like shedding a heavy weight from her shoulders. Once they finished, Officer Taylor turned to Mia's parents. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention," she said. "We take these matters very seriously. I will start an investigation right away." Mia's mom spoke up, her voice filled with conviction. "We want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Our daughter deserves to feel safe." Officer Taylor nodded. "Absolutely. We will do everything we can to ensure that." After their meeting, Mia felt a mix of emotions. She was relieved to have shared her story, but still worried about what would happen next. What if the officer was not held accountable? What if he hurt someone else? On the way home, Mia's parents talked about the investigation. "This is just the beginning, Mia," her dad said. "You've taken a big step by speaking up, and now we can work together to make things right." Mia smiled, grateful for her parents' support. "I just want to make sure it doesn't happen again," she said. That evening, the family sat down to watch the news. Mia's heart raced when she saw a segment about the police department and the importance of treating everyone with respect. "This is a step in the right direction," her mom said, watching the screen closely. Later, Mia went to her room, feeling more determined than ever. She began writing in her journal, expressing her feelings about the incident. Writing helped her process the emotions swirling inside her. She wanted to turn her pain into something positive. Mia decided to write a letter to the police chief, explaining her experience and urging for better training for officers. She felt empowered as she wrote, her fingers flying over the pages. As she closed her journal, she knew this was just the start of her journey. Mia was ready to face whatever came next, determined to use her voice for change. She had faced fear and emerged stronger. She was ready to fight for herself and others, ensuring that they would never have to go through what she did. The next day, Mia's parents helped her send the letter to the police chief. "We are proud of you, Mia," her dad said. "You are making a difference." Mia felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She was on a mission, and she was not going to stop until justice was served. The truth revealed. As days passed, Mia and her family waited anxiously for updates on the investigation. Mia tried to focus on school, but the incident at the park remained at the forefront of her mind. Every time she saw a police officer on the street, her heart would race, and memories of that day would come flooding back. Then, one evening, Mia's father received a phone call from the police department. After a brief conversation, he hung up and looked at Mia and her mother, his expression serious but calm. "They've completed the investigation," he said. "We're meeting with Officer Taylor tomorrow. She says they've uncovered some things we should know." The next morning, they returned to the police department. Mia felt nervous, but she also felt a flicker of hope. Maybe justice would finally be served. Inside, they were greeted by Officer Taylor, who led them into a private room. On the table was a folder filled with documents. "Mia, thank you for coming in again," Officer Taylor began. "We've thoroughly investigated the incident, and we have some findings that we need to discuss." Mia sat up straight, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what to expect. Officer Taylor opened the folder and began speaking. "The officer who assaulted you, Officer Bradley, has a history of misconduct. We've discovered that this wasn't the first time he's behaved inappropriately. He has a record of complaints filed against him for excessive force and discriminatory behavior." Mia's mom gasped softly. Her dad clenched his fists, his expression growing more intense. "Why wasn't something done sooner?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Officer Taylor nodded solemnly. "You're right to ask that. The truth is, some of these complaints were ignored or dismissed. But your case brought his actions into the spotlight. We've taken immediate steps, and Officer Bradley has been suspended while we conduct a deeper investigation. This time, we won't let it go unnoticed." Mia listened intently, a mix of relief and anger swirling inside her. The idea that this officer had hurt other people made her furious, but knowing that her voice had sparked real action gave her hope. Officer Taylor continued, "We are also taking your suggestion about better officer training very seriously. The department is going to implement new programs focused on de-escalation and community relations, ensuring that incidents like this don't happen again." Mia felt a sense of pride swelling inside her. She had helped make this change happen. Her courage had exposed a deeper issue within the system. As they prepared to leave, Officer Taylor handed Mia a copy of the investigation report. "Mia, I want to thank you for your bravery. You've done more than just stand up for yourself. You've helped prevent future harm." Mia's parents stood beside her, their faces filled with pride. As they walked out of the police station, Mia felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. In the car, Mia's mom turned to her. "You did something incredible today, Mia. I hope you know that." Mia smiled. "I just wanted to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else." Her dad nodded. "And you did. Your bravery helped uncover the truth." Back home, Mia sat down at her desk and opened her journal. She had been writing about her experience every night, using her words to process her emotions and track the progress of the investigation. Now, as she wrote about the results, She felt a sense of closure beginning to form. But Mia also knew this wasn't the end. There was still more to be done. Officer Bradley might have been suspended, but she wanted to see him fully held accountable for his actions. She wanted to ensure that no other child would face the same fear and pain she had felt that day. As she closed her journal, Mia's phone buzzed with a message. It was from one of her friends at school, who had heard about the investigation from local news reports. "You're amazing, Mia. So proud of you for standing up," the message read. Mia smiled as she read the supportive words. She had been nervous about what others would think, but knowing that her friends stood by her gave her strength. That night, Mia lay in bed, thinking about everything that had happened. She was still angry about what Officer Bradley had done, but she was also grateful for the support she had received from her family, her friends, and Officer Taylor. She had learned an important lesson through it all. Speaking up, even when it's scary, can lead to real change. And even though the journey wasn't over yet, Mia was ready to keep fighting for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone. Mia fell asleep that night with a newfound sense of purpose. She knew that the truth had been revealed, and now it was time to ensure that justice was served. "You said, the legal battle begins." Mia and her family had hoped that Officer Bradley's suspension would be the end of the story, but it turned out to be just the beginning. As the weeks passed, Mia's father received a call from their lawyer, informing them that Officer Bradley had hired a defense team and was planning to fight the accusations. "It looks like we're going to court," their lawyer, Mr. Daniels, said calmly during a meeting at their house. "Bradley's lawyers are arguing that he acted within his duty, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But don't worry, we have strong evidence on our side." Mia's mother looked worried, but Mia's father placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We knew this might happen, but we're ready for it. We'll make sure the truth is heard." For Mia, hearing that she might have to testify in court brought a new wave of anxiety. The thought of sitting in front of a courtroom full of people, speaking about the day she was assaulted, made her stomach turn. But Mia also knew how important it was to stand up and tell her story. Her father noticed the worry on her face and sat down beside her. "Mia, I know this is going to be hard, but you're not alone in this. We'll be right there with you every step of the way." Mia nodded, trying to be brave. She had already come this far, and she knew she couldn't back down now. In the weeks leading up to the trial, Mia and her family worked closely with their lawyer to prepare. They went over every detail of the incident, reviewing the security footage from the park and all the documents from the police investigation. Each time Mia watched the footage, she felt a surge of anger and frustration. The video clearly showed Officer Bradley grabbing her without cause, yet he was still trying to deny what had happened. The media also caught wind of the story, and soon it became a high-profile case. News channels began reporting on the upcoming trial, calling it a fight for justice and highlighting the issue of police misconduct. Mia's face appeared on TV screens, and while some of the attention made her uncomfortable, she knew it was important for people to hear her story. Her friends at school were supportive, and strangers online sent her messages of encouragement. "You're a hero, Mia," one message read. "Keep fighting for what's right." As the trial date approached, Mia's parents became more protective. They limited her time online to shield her from the more negative comments. Some people, especially those who supported Officer Bradley, questioned her motives or accused her of exaggerating the incident. Mia tried not to let the negativity affect her, but it was hard not to feel overwhelmed at times. The night before the trial, Mia's mother found her sitting quietly in her room, staring at the journal she had kept since the incident. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked gently, sitting beside her. Mia nodded but didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm scared," she finally admitted. "What if they don't believe me?" Her mother wrapped her arm around her. "Mia, the truth is on your side. You've already shown so much courage. No matter what happens, we're proud of you." Mia took a deep breath, finding comfort in her mother's words. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, But she also knew she had to stand up for herself and for all the others who had been mistreated. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Mia, dressed in her best clothes, sat beside her parents and their lawyer as the trial began. Officer Bradley was present, looking calm and composed, surrounded by his defense team. But Mia wasn't intimidated. She reminded herself why she was there: to tell the truth and seek justice. As the opening statements were made, Mia's heart pounded in her chest. The moment was finally here. She would soon take the stand and recount the day that had changed her life. The lawyer gave her a reassuring nod, and Mia squeezed her mother's hand for support. When the judge called her name to testify, Mia stood up, her legs shaky, but her resolve strong. She walked to the witness stand, feeling the weight of the moment. She took a deep breath, looked out at the courtroom, and began to tell her story. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, Mia gained confidence. She described everything that had happened that day at the park, from the moment she was approached by Officer Bradley to the terrifying moment when he grabbed her. She could feel the eyes of the courtroom on her, but Mia focused on speaking clearly, making sure every detail was heard. When the defense lawyer tried to discredit her, questioning her version of events, Mia didn't back down. She knew what had happened, and she refused to let anyone twist the truth. By the time Mia finished her testimony, the courtroom was silent. She had told her story with strength and honesty, and everyone could see it. As she returned to her seat, her parents smiled at her, their pride shining through. Mia had done her part. Now, it was up to the court to decide the next step in this battle for justice. The trial's turning point. The tension in the courtroom was thick as the trial continued. Officer Bradley's defense team tried everything to weaken Mia's testimony. They argued that she had overreacted and that the officer had only been doing his duty. Bradley himself testified, maintaining that he had no intention of harming Mia and that it was all a misunderstanding. But Mia's lawyer, Mr. Daniels, was prepared. He had reviewed every piece of evidence meticulously and was ready to present the crucial turning point in the case. "We have one more witness, Your Honor," Mr. Daniels said with confidence, turning toward the judge. The defense team exchanged uneasy glances as a technician entered the courtroom, carrying a screen. The prosecutor approached the bench with a small device in hand. "This is the complete, unedited footage from the security cameras at the park," Mr. Daniels explained, handing the device to the court technician. "This video captures the moments leading up to and during Officer Bradley's assault on Mia." The courtroom grew quiet. The judge nodded, and the technician began playing the video for everyone to see. Mia's heart pounded as the images flickered on the screen. The video showed her peacefully sitting in her wheelchair at the park, enjoying the day. Then, Officer Bradley approached her, and the footage clearly showed how aggressive he became. There was no justification for his actions. Gasps spread across the courtroom as the video played. Mia's parents gripped each other's hands tightly. The footage left no room for doubt. It contradicted everything Officer Bradley had claimed, exposing the truth of what had happened that day. His actions were not of a calm, reasonable police officer. They were of someone who had let his power go to his head. The defense team tried to object, claiming the video didn't show the whole story, but the damage was done. The truth was out there for everyone to see. "Your Honor, it's clear from this footage that Officer Bradley acted recklessly and violated Mia's rights," Mr. Daniels stated firmly. "There was no threat, no provocation. This is a clear case of abuse of power." The judge watched the video intently before addressing the defense. "Do you have any further arguments, counselor?" she asked, her tone leaving little room for hope. The defense attorney, clearly rattled, stood and cleared his throat. We have no further witnesses, Your Honor." Officer Bradley sat rigidly in his chair, his face pale. For the first time since the trial began, he looked shaken. He had underestimated the strength of the case against him, and now the truth had been exposed for all to see. Mia felt a wave of relief wash over her as the courtroom absorbed what had just been shown. Her family squeezed her hand, sharing a moment of quiet triumph. After everything she had endured, Mia had finally told her story, and it was being believed. As the day progressed, more evidence was presented, and the prosecution closed their arguments. The case was now in the hands of the judge and jury. Mia's lawyer spoke passionately about justice, not only for Mia, but for every victim of abuse by those in positions of power. His words struck a chord with everyone in the room. Mia sat quietly, watching as the judge prepared to adjourn the session for the day. It wasn't over yet. The verdict would come soon, and everyone was anxiously waiting for the final outcome. But for the first time in a long time, Mia felt hopeful. The truth had been revealed, and justice was within reach. The courtroom began to empty out, but Mia and her family stayed for a moment longer. Her father leaned over and whispered, "You did it, Mia. You stood up for what's right." Mia smiled, feeling the weight of the trial begin to lift off her shoulders. There was still more to face, but she had taken the hardest step. Now, it was only a matter of time before justice was served. As they left the courtroom, Mia noticed the reporters outside, waiting for any new developments. She had become the face of a fight much bigger than herself, and while that pressure had been overwhelming at times, Mia knew she was ready for it now. The truth had been spoken, and the world was listening. Justice delivered. The day of the verdict had arrived. Mia sat with her family in the packed courtroom, her heart racing. The entire city was buzzing about the trial. It had captured the attention of not just the media, but people everywhere who saw Mia's fight for justice as a symbol of something much bigger. Mia's father, Robert, sat beside her, gripping her hand tightly. He had remained calm through most of the trial, but today even he looked tense. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The jury filed in, and the judge took her seat. The air was thick with anticipation. Officer Bradley sat across the room, looking a shadow of the confident man he had been when this all started. His defense team had done everything in their power to shift the blame, but the video evidence and witness testimonies had painted a clear picture. Mia tried to steady her breathing as the judge called for order in the courtroom. The jury foreperson stood and handed a piece of paper to the judge. For what seemed like an eternity, the judge read the verdict silently before turning to face the court. In the case of Mia Roberts versus Officer Bradley, the jury has reached a unanimous decision. The judge began, her voice steady. "We find the defendant, Officer Bradley, guilty on all charges." Mia's breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was real, she could barely process it. Her mother gasped softly beside her, and her father let out a deep sigh of relief. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and gasps as the weight of the verdict sank in. Mia's lawyer, Mr. Daniels, leaned over and whispered, "You did it, Mia. We did it." Officer Bradley's face drained of color. His defense team scrambled to offer final words, but the judge swiftly silenced them. "Officer Bradley, you have been found guilty of abuse of power, assault, and misconduct. You will be sentenced accordingly at a later date." The courtroom was cleared, but Mia and her family stayed in their seats for a few moments longer, soaking in what had just happened. Justice had been served, and Officer Bradley would finally face the consequences of his actions. As Mia stood to leave, she was greeted by applause from the crowd outside. Reporters swarmed around, but her father guided her through the crowd, keeping her safe. They made their way to the steps of the courthouse, where Mia paused for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces watching her. Mia felt an overwhelming sense of pride. She had faced incredible odds, but she had refused to back down. And now, because of her courage, justice had been done. Not just for herself, but for others who had suffered in silence. Her father placed his hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Mia. You fought for what was right, and you won." Mia smiled through the tears that had welled up in her eyes. "We all fought," she said softly, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The battle was finally over, and the weight that had been on her shoulders for so long was gone. The days following the trial were a whirlwind. Mia became a symbol of hope and resilience for many, and her story was shared far and wide. People everywhere were inspired by her courage, and the case led to new discussions about accountability in law enforcement. But for Mia, the most important part was knowing that she had stood up for herself and for others like her. She had shown the world that justice could be achieved, even when the odds were stacked against you. As she stood in the glow of the setting sun, Mia knew her life had changed forever. But it wasn't just her life. Because of her bravery, the world had changed, too. She wasn't just the girl who had been attacked by a police officer. She was the girl who had fought back and won.